Without question, the sport of tennis is so much better off because of the tireless work of Sara Fornaciari. And she's going to join me here on the Onto Something podcast. I'm Bryan Fenley, calling tennis for Tennis Channel and the USTA on their Challenger circuit. And for as much as Sara has done from a resume perspective, and it's a sparkling resume, for one, first female sports agent attorney, this conversation, and if you have followed this conversation series, we don't limit ourselves to just talking about one's career. We're going to go down that road undoubtedly, but there's another side to Sara, the personal angle. She is a mom of two, and we're going to go down that path as well. Much different than other sports and media podcasts where we want to get the human angle. And I think we were able to capture that in a beautiful way. Before we get started, don't forget to subscribe. Here is my chat with Sara. She is one of the best ambassadors that the game of tennis has ever had. First female sports agent attorney, Sara Fornaciari, joining me here on the Onto Something podcast. I'm Bryan Fenley with Tennis Channel USTA as a commentator, and we are going to tell Sara's story and what she's done, not just in the sport of tennis, but beyond. Look at her life, look at her career. We're going to get the well-rounded look. Sara, are you ready? I cannot wait to get this conversation going.
Already, Bryan. I got to do this before, as I say, I only have half-Alzheimer's now, before I have Alzheimer's.
We are going to get into some great memories, but I got to ask you, behind you, that license plate, having that on the wall, what's the significance?
Well, that is one of my favorite keepsakes among all the many keepsakes I've had. That is it says IGA Tennis, and that's the name of the WTA tournament sponsor I had for a decade. And at the top of that license plate, it says Oklahoma. And I was proudly promoting for the WTA at 250 in Oklahoma City from 1990 to 2001. And that is signed by all the players. I can't tell you which exact year that was, but it's my favorite keepsake. So I keep it right behind me to remind myself of the glory days of women's tennis, in my view.
Some of the people that have redefined the sport of tennis, and on the female side, but everybody in general, some of the pictures behind you, I'm looking at from the Williams sisters to Pam and Martina, and you think about the relationships that you've been able to foster with them. How is your life so different with all of them coming into your life?
Well, it's so special because when I started in tennis in 1973, it was a different game, and we were all family, and we were truly family. And today I can honestly say that Tracy Austin and Pam Shriver are part of my family. And I have relationships now that have spanned nearly 50 years with both of those young ladies who I knew when they were young teenagers and taking on the world. And Pam Shriver being the youngest ever finalist at the US Open at age 16, and Tracy Austin being the youngest winner at age 16 of the US Open. And today they're both as close to me as could possibly be. And so what a special career. And I always say that my career, I didn't get rich. I came before all the money got out there, but I've had the most enriching career in life because of women's tennis.
The way in which your career has been enriching is fascinating, because when we were talking earlier, Sara, there are things that happen in your career that when you were first coming out of college that you didn't expect would one day lead you to where you are. You took on, in a way, you are a pioneer in a lot of different ways. And obviously we talked about you being the first female sports agent attorney, but also as a sports writer. And we get really into you beginning in college as a sports writer and wanting to go down that route. What was your writing style in college coming off a sporting event?
Well, just to go back a little bit, it never occurred to me that I couldn't be a sports writer. I wanted to be a journalist from a very, very young age, not a sports journalist, a journalist. And from about junior high school, I wanted to be a journalist, and I worked hard. I went to a summer school for journalism, and I was editor of my high school paper. and I went to the University of Pennsylvania, and I went to join the school paper, and it said features here, news here, sports here. I'd never given any distinction a thought, because when you're at a small girls' school, as I was, you were doing everything. And so I said, oh, sports, that'll be fun. And I walked in 1969, and the guys looked at me like I had two heads. They'd never seen a girl walk in. And so I had to convince them that I knew a lot about sports. It never occurred to me I didn't know about sports, because I went to a girls' school. And of course we wrote about sports. But this was really, really news to these guys. And the University of Pennsylvania was a very liberal school, and these guys gave me a shot. And I will never thank them enough that I covered men's. I convinced them I know everything about men's lacrosse. I'm from Baltimore, Maryland, and I live near Johns Hopkins University, and I know about this sport. So I covered men's lacrosse, men's tennis, men's squash, played tennis and squash, had bylines, worked for a newspaper in Baltimore for 3 years in the summer, because I was very qualified for my age. And I worked on the city desk, but they wouldn't let me near sports. I couldn't get near the sports desk at all. And I tried to interview at the Baltimore Sun. They wouldn't speak to me. And if I'd had bylines while I was at the University of Pennsylvania that said Sam Kleppinger instead of my maiden name, Sara Kleppinger, I would have had job offers all over the place. But I couldn't get a job offer. And I graduated from college in 3 years. I went to get a master's in journalism. I couldn't get a job. So I finally did. A year after I graduated from Penn in 1973, the summer of Watergate, the Washington Post gave me my break. I was the first female sports intern hired by the Washington Post. And I couldn't believe my good fortune. So I was covering what is now the City Open. It was called the Washington Star International, and it was won that year by Arthur Ashe. And Jan Tirac was coaching Guillermo Vilas, and, players, Ray Moore was playing. It was back in those days. And there was a man in charge, and I went up to him with my idea. I said, Mr. Dell, I didn't know who Donald Dell was from Adam. I said, I'm the reporter from the Post. Could I ask you, do you have any contacts at World Tennis Magazine? Because that had been founded by Gladys Heldman, a female. I thought, maybe, just maybe, World Tennis would hire a female to cover the Women's Pro Tour that was 2 years old. Imagine a female covering women's tennis. I mean, what an unheard of idea. What a novel thought. And he said, well, I do have contacts, but I have a law firm, and we represent Arthur Ashe and Stan Smith and various basketball stars. And we need somebody to do, and some women's stars. Val Ziegenfuss was a client. Ingrid Benser was a client. We need someone to do PR about our athletes. And I thought, well, maybe I got to give this a shot, because maybe I'm not going to get a job as a sports writer. I mean, maybe it's just there's no women sports writers. At that time, there was not a full-time women sports writer at the New York Times, at the Washington Post. Shortly thereafter, broke through. That end of the summer, Robin Herman was hired by the New York Times, but I'd been out of college for a year by that time. And they promoted a woman at the Washington Post from the newsroom to cover sports, but there were none when I started walking around. So I went to this law firm 20 days after Billie Jean King beat Bobby Riggs, timeliness. And I walked in, and there were 5 male attorneys and 5 female secretaries. And that didn't sit well with me at all. I mean, I couldn't even sign the stationery, because your non-attorney can't sign law firm stationery. And I thought, this isn't right. So I checked things out, and I applied to the law school in Washington, D.C. that had the highest number of women in attendees, and that was Catholic University. I went there at night, worked full-time for Donald Dell's law firm, Dell, Craig Hill, Fentress, and Benton, and graduated a semester early and became the first female sports attorney. So I refer to myself as the accidental attorney. But to this day, and I'm doing more writing again in my consulting work, I really, really wanted to be a sports writer, not a agent, promoter, etc. But in all those jobs, I've had a lot of opportunity to write quite a bit descriptively, and I've been happy doing that, and it's been a fabulous life. But I didn't get to do what I really deserved to have been rewarded to do when I graduated from an Ivy League school, having covered sports for 3 years.
Saying what you just said there, Sara, not being able to do that, but to see others come after you and be able to do that. How does that sit with you? With sure, the fact is that you weren't able at the time, unfortunately, but the road you were able to pave for others, how does that help you in your processing of, yeah, I wish I could have done this, but here's what I did and how many people I helped?
Well, obviously, I've had an incredibly fulfilling career, and I've had so many wonderful memories and rewards. And I mean, running the IGA Tennis Classic was amazing. It was the first tournament Venus Williams won. I gave her wild card. It was the first tournament Serena Williams won. She won the doubles because her father told me, could I give both of them wild cards? But if I gave them wild cards, I had to put them in the separate half of the draw. And so he had Serena only play doubles. True story. But anyway, I had these types of opportunities. The most emotional moment for me was when Tony Gotzik decided that I should help Monica on her comeback after she had recovered from being stabbed. It was her first tournament, and she came to Oklahoma City because he knew I was going to take good care of her, and she won. And I mean, that's the kind of memories that, you can't replace. There's nothing to replace that moment. And so I've had such an amazing experience in life. And I am so glad that others have had opportunities and that there are others pursuing both sports writing, sports broadcasting, etc. I wish there were more women promoters, because when I became one of only 8 women to ever own and operate a WTA tour to this 50 years, I did it at my own risk. I had to raise about $700,000 a year in Oklahoma City or lose my house. And I just wish today that I saw some of these players reinvesting in our sport a little bit more directly. And that's an area where we need to take, quote, full ownership. And so that the reason I haven't retired after 50 years is because I think we still have a long way to go. For me, when I see women's tennis not getting paid equal prize money, my one-liner to every man around who will listen, and some aren't happy to hear it, is, okay, so you have a son and you have a daughter, and you want them to do the same job, but you want your son to get more money than your daughter for doing the same job? And that's my position. I don't care. I don't want to hear about your broadcast rights being higher, because men have gotten to play tennis a lot longer in a lot more places than women have. And so when the Grand Slams, the US Open in particular, should get the applause, and it is this year, 50 years of equal prize money, 1 and 1 made 3. They decided in 1973 that women deserved equal prize money. Hurrah for the USTA and the US Open. It took until 2007 for Wimbledon to step up to the plate. So those are the types of situations that still exist in a number of areas that we still need to work hard on. And so I'm not willing to walk away from the plate yet, because I follow Billie Jean's advice. You got to be in the room. And if you walk away, you're not in the room. And so I still believe we have a lot of work to do, not just in women's tennis, but in many areas for women's rights and in women's sports. Women's tennis is the leader in women's sports, but we're still not equal.
With your help, steps are being made to get there, along with those that you're close with. Joining me right now, of course, is Sara Fornaciari. I'm Bryan Fenley. This is the Onto Something podcast. What I notice about your career in your life, Sara, is that the status quo is not good enough. And you come in with a lot of boldness, and you come in taking no and saying, that's not going to work for me. How far back do you trace this persistent, I want to make a difference, I'm not going to take what's being told to me as the final answer, and I'm going to do something different here, and then go on to see the gravity of the situation where so many would then follow suit after you?
Well, my mantra has been, and when I mentor, I love mentoring young people now, and I've done this in my business for a long time, but my mantra is, no is just the beginning of the discussion. And that applies across the board in everything I've ever achieved in my personal life and career, because until you understand why someone's saying no to you, you can't even begin to solve that problem. And so for whatever reason, I've always been incredibly goal oriented. And if there's something that needs to be done, I'm just going to go after it until I can get it done to the best of my ability. And the best story I have is that I took the bar exam, and back in the 1978, when I took it, I got a letter saying I failed. I was in a state of shock. I said to myself, I've never failed anything. I graduated from an Ivy League school in 3 years. I'm an English major. I write well. It just doesn't make sense. So I looked at all the results they sent me, and I'd passed the multi-state bar part of it, which was 200 multiple choice questions. And I'd failed supposedly the written essays. And I thought, no way, I've never failed. No way I've failed an essay. So I sat down and added up all the raw scores. And when I added up the raw scores, I got a score 21 points higher than theirs, which is what they said I got on part 2. And I said, is this possible? Could they have really screwed up my exam results? So I went out to dinner with one of my very good attorney friends, showed all the results to him. And he said, there's something, wrong on the face of this. But before I even did that, I called the bar examiners and said, my scores just don't add up. Something's wrong here. And I did think maybe they put the wrong scores in on the paper, and maybe I got lower scores than show here on this paper, but something's wrong on the face of this document. So I went in the next day and they said, Miss Kleppinger, we are pleased to say that you passed the bar, and we apologize. We didn't add part 2 in your total. And that is a true story. And that really says everything you ever want to know about me, because I just don't accept no as the answer until I actually investigate. And I know that sometimes you're going to get no for an answer. And and when I'm mentoring young kids and they're coming through, I say, look, if you compete, you will lose. But if you do not compete, you cannot win. And that's really how I look at it. So if I believe passionately in something, I'm going to pursue it. Sometimes I'm not going to get my own result, but if I don't go after it, I have no chance. And so, that's how I've tried to go out. And when I was at ProServe, we became ProServe, the sports marketing agency. We stopped being Dell, Craig Hill, Fentress, and Benton and moved into being an agency so we could do a broader range of activities. I was the only woman ever on the board of directors. And someday when I get some time and do what I really say I want to do, I want to write a book called 7 Men and Me, because there were 7 men and me. And that's a difference in the room, let me tell you.
When you're in that room, and when that first happened for you, how did you and what did you do to make sure all of those men gave you your rightful respect, even though it was a 7-to-1 ratio?
Well, I didn't get my rightful respect from a number of those men, and some I did and some I didn't. And I believe that I was not given my rightful respect at a point. And so I left after 17 years of being involved with this entity. I left and I started my own company, and Sports Plus, and it's now 33 years later where I just said, okay, I'm going out and doing this on my own. I cannot tolerate being treated in what I viewed as just not quite equitably. That would be an understatement. Yeah. But, they didn't invest in, they did have Virginia Slims tournaments from the beginning, but investing in women's sports in a really significant way wasn't on the to-do list, really. Because Michael Jordan and Patrick Ewing and these other guys were bringing in plenty of money, there wasn't an urgency to grow the women's business, with an investment. And in fact, ultimately, they sold their women's tennis tournament back, the IGA Tennis Classic. I purchased the rights to that while I was at ProServe. Wow. And bought it back from them when I left. I bought that tournament because I thought we had a Virginia Slims regular what would be a 500 now, and this was a 250, and I wanted to be able to bring young players through. And so when I left, I bought it back.
One of those young players at the time, well, the Williams sisters, and
Yeah.
you've been close with that family ever since then, and seeing both of them shoot to stardom. What about them now is unchanged from when you first met them when they were young?
Well, I can say for Venus Williams in particular, she was the leading voice to get equal prize money for women in 2007 at Wimbledon. The leading voice. And she was, at that point, she won her first tournament at the IGA Tennis Classic in 1998. So that was less than 10 years into her career. So she has always stepped up to the plate fervently to follow her beliefs. And I just give her all due respect. And then Serena, well, let me back up a little bit. Their mother started a nonprofit in order to help underserved kids academically at risk, not athletically. And I helped with that. And we promoted something called, which I named the Oracene Williams Learning Foundation, the OWL Foundation. And we promoted exhibition sponsored by JP Morgan for 3 years and 1 year by Lexus to raise money. And they were all in as a family there. Venus, Serena, their half sisters, and their mother. And to this day, Serena is also quite, engaged and involved in nonprofit and helping others, and in Africa, bringing tennis to kids. So that's what I take as the most important personal quality, is being always willing to give back to others. And that's what I saw in both of those young ladies from the very beginning.
You showed me that picture at your tournament, and I believe Serena on her Instagram, if I'm not mistaken.
Venus,
Venus, my apologies. Venus showed you in the trophy ceremony, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
Those moments, being there, what do they do for you?
Well, I can just tell you, that's how I refer to my career as so enriching, because money can't buy those experiences. You can have all the money in the world, but if you don't have the emotional bonds of the moment with people, what's it all about? What's really there? It's in your bank account, but it's not in your emotional wherewithal. And that's what I feel has been so important and significant in my life, and it will continue to be, because I care so much about our sports world, and this is the 50th anniversary of the WTA tour, and we just have to make sure we are truly equal. And if I get to see us be truly equal, I will be one happy camper along the way. And to digress for just a moment, because I do care about other sports, just to say, where are we as women? This is the end of Women's History Month right now. In the NBA, there are 12 WNBA, there are 12 franchises. 5 are owned by the NBA. And the entire roster payroll, 10 players on every WNBA team, their entire payroll is $1,150,000 approximately, maybe $1,175,000, something like that. Less than $1,250,000. 10 players. That's why Brittany Griner was in Russia.
Yeah.
Guy in the NBA, 5 NBA teams own of the 12 wouldn't take a foul shot for $1,100,000. And so tell me about, where are we today? They get 10,000 fans when they play in Division I college basketball. I'm almost speechless about it, because it's something I do want to follow through and follow up. And I've actually mentioned to James Brown about it. JB said, come on and talk about it. I want to make sure I get all the facts. I know that fact about the payroll. I just about fell over, because if that's how women's sports, look at the women's soccer team, what they had to do to sue to get to their rightful station, having more wins than the men. I mean, it's a very difficult situation when you look across the board and it's not equal.
When you're seeing these situations play up, Sarah, where there's such a fight, whether it's women's soccer and they're able to get more money and more attention, rightly deserved, why in your experiences, or how in your experiences, when you get to the bargaining table and you have what you feel, why or how is it best served to communicate to the other side to say this is how it needs to be? What are your tactics for the way that you feel that change is made, not fastest, because it seemingly doesn't always happen that fast, but your way of getting people to see how you see things? What is your process in that?
Well, I've always had to go out and actually prove it. And that's why I owned a professional tennis tournament. I bought the rights and then I sold the event because my sponsorship issues were just massive, at nothing to do with me and nothing to do with them being unhappy. But I went out and proved it. And so that's what I've always tried to do. I've always tried to actually demonstrate through whatever I've been doing that this is the right way to be. I'm just happy to report that I'm very good pals with Francis Tiafoe. I've known him forever. And Francis Tiafoe, I asked him what he thought of equal prize money. And Francis Tiafoe said, I'm all for it. Because Francis Tiafoe's generation, they accept that these young ladies are their equals. They don't have that prejudicial, view that, well, we have higher data rights or broadcast rights. They understand that the Grand Slams do it the right way, that and to me, 1 and 1 makes 3. Because if the Grand Slams are the biggest and the best, then why aren't we all on the same page? And so, I think that it's probably going to change a little bit as we get more of the generation of the Francis Tiafoes and et cetera, who are in decision-making capacities at the ATP. And of course, the WTA is already there. But, it's just, you got to just go out and do as much as you can do. So I think I want to try to get the message out that we need these players to invest in ownership of professional tennis tournaments. Women need to invest in these roles, not just hope they get the job of being the tournament director.
With all that you've said, Sarah, and equality and equity in pay, and that making significant strides, what about what you've seen progress wise? How do you celebrate those wins?
I don't know if I feel like celebrating all of them because they're so long overdue. When I see we get the first female general manager in baseball or at the NFL in any position, and then I'm not really celebrating because it's 50 years. I'm saying, well, I'm certainly glad it's long overdue. And so that's how I feel about so many areas of the sports world, but also just generally the real world. And that it's taken 50 years. That's a good amount of time where women have been certainly qualified to move at a little bit quicker pace. And when I think that I actually moved right through it, I still don't quite fathom that I actually did that. I mean, it's amazing to me.
You talk about those 50 years and how far things have come along, and it's been slow and, as you said, overdue. But what about in those 50 years of you committing yourself to this has been fast, and seemingly you can't even believe how those 50 years in a way have already happened so quickly?
Well, in my career, there've been so many different chapters too, because the first 10 years of the first player representation time in my career, that was the first chapter. I was an agent, and I was graced with having the best clients I can ever imagine. And I, again, talk about memories. I represented Natasha Zvereva. And at that time, all the Soviet players all their prize money went directly to the Soviet Tennis Federation. They didn't get any of the money that they won. And then one day it was getting a little bit more liberal in terms of rights of players to move around and do their own thing. And all of a sudden, it was decided that Natasha was going to accept prize money directly at Amelia Island. And so I was there. She got the check. It happened. It was her money. It was in her bank account. She was legitimately at first concerned about, well, would there be repercussions? But she was such a great star and so important that it set the stage for all of the Russian players the Soviet players to accept their own prize money. That's something I'll never forget. That was a moment to celebrate at Amelia Island. Then another one, I represented Hu Na. She was the first Chinese player she left Taiwan and declared her independence. And Hu Na never became #1 in the world, but she did do that. And so I've seen women step up to the plate and have such incredible achievements and successes. And it's just amazing to have been part of their lives and those experiences for me. So, that was chapter 1, players. Then chapter 2 was when I was promoting the IGA Tennis Classic, and Virginia Slims chose me and selected me as one of 6 promoters to promote their Virginia Slims Legends. So I was promoting events with Billie Jean and Rosie Casals and Yvonne Goolagong and Chrissy and Martina. And so that was stage 2 of my career on my own. And, then I started doing Oracene, Oracene's nonprofit ALF Foundation work. And that led me to stage 3, which is really where I am today, which is I do a lot of work with the USTA Foundation, JTCC, nonprofits, NYJTL, Harlem Junior Tennis. I'm passionate about Harlem Junior Tennis, trying to build their own facility, kicking off their next 50 years. So I've moved along in where I've been focusing my energies and trying through working in the nonprofit side, which is certainly not where you're going to make the most money side of things, but where you can give back to the sport at so many levels that are just so important, I think, overall. And so that's how my career, as I sort of summarize, I say in the beginning, I was stealing the money from my clients, and now I'm giving it back for the kids.
Well, you have a couple of kids yourself, and I'll talk about that in just a quick moment, because you are a mom too, which is really important to your story. But with everything that you've done in giving back to the sport, how do you take a compliment?
Well, I think one of the biggest compliments was when WTA Charities hired me as their marketing consultant, because that was a statement: we believe in what you're doing and what you can do to help us globally. And I'm so proud to be associated with Ann Austin and WTA Charities. And it's the pinnacle of my career to be able to give back at that level.
How has what you've done in your career and what you fought for, how has that translated to you being a mom and fighting for your kids and what's right for them?
Well, I think that both my kids would tell you that I was, pretty strict mom as far as whatever they were going to be doing. Academics counted first, second, and third, and other activities. Of course, everybody was going to play tennis, and my daughter, I was a swimmer. She was a great swimmer. but I always encourage them to pursue their dreams as well. And I think one of the things that I think is a little bit, I'm really happy to see today, but in my initial generation, not that many of the women my age who were really committed to the Women's Pro Tour did get married and have families. And I think, you had to give back so much to get anywhere on that, circuit, that there are not tons of moms out there. I mean, there are, for example, Val Ziegenfuss, a mom, etc. Ingrid Benser's a mom, but there's a lot of more people who could have probably, and professionally in the Virginia Slim staff and the teams, there were a lot of people who didn't end up getting married and having kids. And when I got married and had kids, I had this idea that maybe I should just have an office, as you're seeing this office where it's been for 31 years, in my home, because I had a big house and I thought, I can have a staff here, I can have an assistant here, I can have interns here, and I can also be home when my kids get home from school, because I'm traveling so much. So I could be here for my kids and for my business. And my husband has referred to our house ever since then as the international headquarters of Sports Plus. He calls and says, how are the international headquarters today? But I was ahead of the game there, because I moved into my home, had a home office in 1991 when no one had a home office. I just figured it out. I figured out how to make it work for me, and how to make it work for my kids, so I could go see their after school activities. Because I had already spent time at Pro Serve. When I was at Pro Serve, I got a grand total of 6 weeks of maternity leave. And there were other things that happened that were even worse that I won't go into. But, so I had to make some decisions, and I figured it out. And I'm just so, deliriously happy to have figured it out.
How do your kids thank you for figuring it out?
Well, I think that we have a good relationship, the kids and I and their dad. That it's not just me. My kids got to see their father, who was the first person in anybody either side of his family to ever go to college, ending up being president of a law school, work 7 days a week. So they grew up with two crazy role models, and we're all close to each other. We spent Christmas together, and my daughter we have a granddaughter, and my son's expecting his first child. And so I can't be happier that out of all of this, I've ended up being somewhat well-rounded. I don't, whatever. And it's incredible. So, and my kids have experienced, the tennis. My daughter not as much as my son, but my son interned with the Tennis Channel and with ESPN and with the Boston Red Sox. And so there have been, some good byproducts of having been around as well.
As we wrap up this conversation, and it's cool because you really are a super mom, because you find it hard to do everything that you're doing and to make the time for your children. And one of the things that I wanted to spotlight here with you was that ability to do both in such a beautiful way. And for a sport that has meant so much to you in tennis, in the game itself, Sara, where do you find the sport most beautiful, most like art?
Well, we always say that tennis teaches life skills, because when you're out there and you hit the shot, it's just you hitting that shot. And tennis is also is unique because it's a sport that teaches life skills like no other, because you are out there making a decision every time you make a shot, and you're responsible for the outcome, good, bad, or otherwise, and so that's what makes tennis to me so beautiful, because in 1 minute a player can have on cloud 9, and the next minute they can be experiencing incredible disappointment. But I think that the ability to have experienced both the highs and the lows, that's what makes tennis such an incredible sport, because it's different. If you're just, it's not really different from track and field or other individual sports, except to the extent that you're out there for competing against somebody. And my daughter told me that she didn't like tennis as much as swimming. And this is her incredible sensitivity. She said, Mom, I don't like to beat somebody. I like to swim because I like to compete against myself. And that's what my daughter told me in high school. And how about that as a teaching life skills? You are beating somebody else. When you're out on the golf course as an individual, you are doing what the swimmers do. You're competing for your best score. If you're in track and field, you're going to try to run your fastest, jump your highest. It's very few sports that it's mano a mano as tennis is. I mean, squash is, other racket sports are too. But I think that's what makes tennis such a beautiful sport, because it teaches humanity and how to deal with beating somebody else. How do you respond to that? That's a life skill, isn't it? That's it. So that's why I think tennis is just so special and so beautiful.
The sport is so special and so beautiful. You've done so much for the sport. And I do find beauty in what your daughter said. I think that's
Oh no,
really
it's amazing.
it's amazing that she obviously thought the way that she did, and at the same time there's this harmony of what you've done, where we talk about tennis and being so much an internal mental battle dealing with the highs and lows. And in a way, beyond tennis, in your career, Sara, you've sort of been, not to say you've been on your own, but you've done things that haven't been done before. And you're out there and you're putting yourself out there, and you don't know what you're going to get back at you. And it's a competition, and you've competed for what you stand for. And a lot has happened positively because of that. And more is going to happen as time goes on. Sara Fornaciari, I'm Bryan Fenley. Thank you so much for the conversation. Really enjoyed this.
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to take an incredible walk down memory lane.
Yes.